Welcome to Navigating IBD with Stephanie A. Wynn, where she tackles the real challenges of living with Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Whether you're newly diagnosed, supporting someone with IBD, or looking for better ways to manage your care, this is your space for honest conversation, practical guidance, and community. This podcast exists to change the narrative, one story, one strategy, and one breakthrough at a time. So join Stephanie as she navigates IBD together with you. Y'all ready? Let's get started.
We are back for another episode of Navigating IBD. I am your host, Stephanie A. Wynn, and I am super excited because we have another amazing episode here, and we have in the building today, y'all. We have Dr. Cassandre Dunbar. She's a medical doctor, professor, mom of two, and the creator and host of the award-winning wellness podcast, Be Well Sis. Through her work, Dr. Dunbar is addressing a critical gap in wellness and mental health spaces where Black women are often underrepresented despite experiencing some of the worst health outcomes. And I'm super excited because for those that are listening, we met at the Healthy Voices Patient Advocacy Conference in October. And it was so amazing just to see patients coming together from different backgrounds, different industries. And I couldn't wait to have her on the podcast so that she can empower us and give us the confidence that we need as Black women who are out here navigating the healthcare system. So welcome, Dr. Dunbar. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. And it was so good to meet you. I was so inspired by the people that I met at that health conference.
Yes.
I went in not knowing what to expect, and I just walked away with just so much inspiration from people doing amazing work like you. So thank you for having me, and I'm excited to chat.
Absolutely. So we're going to get right into the topics this evening. So my question for you, we're breaking the silence around mental health, right? We want to break that silence. So Dr. Dunbar, stigma around mood disorder remains a significant barrier in many communities, particularly among Black women. From your clinical and personal perspective, why does this stigma persist, and what impact does it have on women seeking support, especially those managing chronic conditions, sort of like inflammatory bowel disease?
This is a great question. I think the answer is twofold. The first part is the stigma exists because there is historical context for it, right? So there was a time in which where having a mental illness or having a mood disorder literally can get you institutionalized for the rest of your life, right? And especially as coming from communities that are already marginalized, and where we are institutionalized for less. There's that stigma there. You don't want to speak up because you may be locked away forever, or generally speaking, there might be some medical mistrust because we're often gaslit. Our symptoms are ignored, and there is a history of experimentation without our consent being done in our communities. So that is where that stigma can come from. And then the other part is going to be social. So thinking about, generally speaking, our communities are deeply religious and deeply spiritual. And sometimes we may feel that, well, let's just take it to our higher power, and that higher power will take care of it. And sometimes we see mental illness or, mood disorders as being looked at as a source of weakness. And because typically speaking, we take on that trope, we take on that cape of being strong Black women, we think that addressing and speaking up about what might be impacting us mentally is a sign of, quote, weakness. And that is not true. So now if you couple that with somebody who is also dealing with a chronic illness, they may just feel like, and they may have been told that, oh, it's all in your head. Like, you have this chronic illness, and of course you're going to feel pain. And one of my One of my gripes with Western medicine is that there is a separation between the physical health, the mental health, and then like the emotional health. It is all interconnected. So if your body is chronically in pain, absolutely it's going to impact your mood. So the depression, the anxiety, and maybe even psychosis sometimes is absolutely linked to what you're experiencing physically.
And you hit on something that is really like, we need to talk about this more. Like, we definitely, when there are symptoms of like mental exhaustion, like that is a thing. That is a thing. I experienced it. I experienced it going through the diagnosis of Crohn's disease. And I remember going in my doctor's office saying, hey, there's something wrong with me. I'm literally losing weight. I'm losing 20 pounds a month. Like,
wow.
Within 90 days, I went from like 189 and I got all the way down to 112 pounds. And I remember telling my primary care, something's wrong. I'm dying. Like, I'm tanking. Like, you got to help me. And she was like, wait a minute. I need you to come back. Let me get you some help. And at that moment, she did recommend that I go see a therapist. However, there were other tests being done. That's why it's so key that when these patients are diagnosed, you gotta consider the mental health. Because if your mind isn't well, your body isn't either.
Right, right. And it's already a stressful time. You know, your body is going through a lot, and just the physiologic stress is absolutely going to impact, you know, the mental health. So think about, you mentioned that you lost a ton of weight in a relatively short amount of time. You literally may not have had the building blocks to make certain neurotransmitters, right? And that's going to impact the mood. You mentioned how just that pushed you into menopause. Of course, we need to have at least 12 to 17% body fat in order to have the regular cycle, because estrogens and things of that nature, they need fat as their precursor. So they need cholesterol in order to create them. So yeah, it's going to impact everything. And to your point, absolutely, there should be a whole team. So not just the rheumatologist or the gastroenterologist and the primary, but also, is there a therapist and or a psychiatrist as part of that team to help you navigate this, especially thinking about how oftentimes, unfortunately, it's not a straightforward diagnosis. It might be years in the making. In the meantime, you physically feel like crap, and that's also going to impact your mental health. People have lost their jobs because they just could not go to work and things like that. So all life is still happening while your body is going through it, and you may not have a reason or an answer as to why your body is going through it. So of course, mentally, you're going to be impacted as well. Yeah.
So, and that leads us into the second question, right? So this is all about the mind-body connection in midlife health, right? You've spoken openly about the intersection of mental health, physical health, and midlife transitions, right? How do perimenopause and hormonal changes affect mental health, and why is it critical for both patients and clinicians to acknowledge these changes rather than dismiss them?
Oh, yes. Well, so perimenopause is a time period in our lives that can go anywhere from 7 to 10 years. So it's a pretty long stretch where it is not just a decline of the estrogens and progesterone and testosterone. It's a fluctuation. So sometimes they might be more elevated than usual. Sometimes they're lower. Either way, this is a time of a transition. So where our neuroendocrine system is literally in transition. The same way that puberty is a time where children go from children to adolescence, is the same kind of situation for us. So think about children. When children are going through puberty, especially towards that middle time, you can tell because there's a change in personality, right? So you can tell physically they might be going through their growth spurt, but also they get a little bit more moody and a little bit more sensitive. They might be sleeping more. All of these things we expect. We should also expect that with ourselves because it's a period of transition, right? So now, whenever there is a fluctuation in our hormones play a huge role in our mental functioning. Also, it's going to impact not just your cognition, but it's also going to impact your mood. And that's completely normal, right? So now, Whenever we talk to our primary care providers, it's super important to mention the things that you're experiencing. So how is your sleep? How is your mood? How is your cognition? Are there any physical symptoms? So it's super important to have clinicians on your team who believe you, who you don't have to convince of anything because you know the truth. And I think it's also really important for patients to remember that, yes, the physicians may have gone through years of schooling, but you are your best expert. You live with yourself your whole life. You know yourself well, and nobody knows you better.
Why is it critical for both patients and clinicians to acknowledge these changes rather than dismiss them?
Okay, so and in terms of clinicians, it's really important to listen to the patient. You are not living their experience every single day. You may see them for 7 minutes, once a year, twice a year, maybe once a quarter, and that's a really good situation. So you don't know what they're experiencing. It's really important in order to have in order to be an effective team, to listen to your patients and not only listen, but to validate and to help them get to a solution. A patient is not going to feel comfortable disclosing things to you if they're constantly being dismissed, and it's a partnership. The provider is not the end all be all. It's not a patriarchal relationship. At least it shouldn't be. It should be a mutual relationship where you're working together to get to the solution. And again, the patient's input is going to be everything. And honestly, the patient should be the driver of the conversations, the driver of things.
You know, we talk about that because we, at our foundation, we have a program for providers where we go in and we train the providers, the residents, the fellows, like how to communicate effectively with Black and brown patients. And it's not that the patient is being non-compliant. It's just that maybe they didn't understand the language that you're speaking. So when you come in and you start talking about biomarkers, biosimilars, or biologics, or terminology that patients know nothing about, to only get home to say, I really didn't understand what he said. Because I don't remember. Those are words that I've never heard before. That's why it's so important and it's so key to understand what the doctor is saying. And you have a right to ask the clinician questions.
Absolutely.
We make sure that we educate the patient so that they are understanding, like, hey, this is why you need to have at least 3 questions, your top 3 priority questions ready when you're going in to see your provider. If you're going in person, you may have 15 minutes max. In person, 10 minutes, 30 seconds telehealth. And so you want to make sure that you have those questions ready and you understand when you leave the answer that the provider gave you when you leave. So or you could utilize the patient portal. That's another option too for patients. And so that is really good. Thank you so much for answering that question, because oftentimes we are dismissed or we're not understood, and we just have to change the stigma of Black people just don't comply, or they're not going to listen anyway. No, that's not the case. The case is we don't really understand what you're saying. And so that leads me into our third question, which is all about empowerment and advocacy. So for women who are listening, Dr. Dunbar, like, who may feel unseen, unheard, or overwhelmed, whether they're navigating inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's disease, or ulcerative colitis, or mental health challenges, or maybe just midlife changes, what practical first steps they can take to begin advocating for their mental and emotional well-being?
If you don't feel like you're being heard, or if you feel like you're constantly being rushed or dismissed, fire that provider. Now, I understand that in some situations, maybe depending on where you live, there may not be access or adequate access to different specialists and things. So I understand that. But if you're in a situation where you have more than one option for a provider, if first one ain't working, move on to the next one. Okay. we have the power to fire. And I love what you mentioned, having at least 3 questions when you show up to the provider. And I think also sometimes if you're just getting a diagnosis, it's overwhelming. So maybe in the moment you don't have a question or the questions were answered. But when you get home, to Stephanie's point, go ahead and log into that portal, send a quick message. I actually thought about this yesterday, and can you answer these questions too? So it's really important to hold your provider accountable by asking questions. And if you feel that you're being dismissed, be completely straight up. Like, you know what? I feel that I'm being dismissed in this moment. I feel like you're not hearing me. You're not listening to me. And then put the ball back in their court. Either they're going to take that feedback and fix it, or you can go ahead and move on. There's also advocacy that goes on in our everyday life too. So outside of the provider relationship, the people in your life, it is really important, especially when navigating chronic illnesses, when some days you just don't have it, and to speak up and to say whether it is physically, I'm in pain, I'm uncomfortable, or mentally, I am overwhelmed, I'm foggy. Speak up to the people around you. There are, especially as Black women, we oftentimes think that, no, I got to be able to do it all. That means I'm a good woman. You are a good woman, just in of itself. But it's really important to be open and to be vulnerable, because people can't read our minds. That's something that I had to learn, is that they can't read our minds. People who have the best intentions for us, our loved ones, have no idea how to help us if we aren't direct. So on those days where you just don't feel it, speak up to the people around you to get that help.
So for listeners who want to stay connected with you and your work, where can they find you?
So I have a podcast called Be Well Sis. So it's a weekly podcast. Every Wednesday, I release an episode, and it's typically talking about all the things, physical, mental, emotional, that can impact us. I typically have a guest, but there are some episodes where it's just me and we're just talking about something. But yeah, I would love for you to tune in. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm also on Instagram. So my page on Instagram is BeWellSis_podcast. And then also, thebewellsis.com is my website.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dunbar, for sharing your insight and reminding us that mental health and physical health are deeply connected, and that and emotional health. And we have to listen to our bodies, and it's okay not to be well mentally when we're going through a thing. And life just happens. I mean, we were at the Healthy Voices, and even with the government shutdown, our flights got canceled. You know what I mean? And so we had to, that was for me, that had never happened to me before. But even that, being in that mental space of, okay, that's okay. I got a roof over my head. I could sleep another night. I hear emotional intelligence all the time, on the social media streets, but that is a thing. That really is a thing. And we really have to tap in. And a lot of us are so burnt out, especially moms, because we're taught to be, you got to be strong. The mother is the matriarch of the family. But if mom isn't well, the house is not going to be well.
Truly.
And so, so we have to think about that when we, when mom doesn't feel like cooking, somebody has to step up and say, hey, I got you today. Listeners, I want to thank you all for tuning in to Navigating IBD with Stephanie Wynn. I am your host, Dr. Dunbar. Thank you so much for tuning in with us and coming on our platform to share your amazing expertise. And thank you so much. I hope to have you back soon.
Thank you.
Until next time, peace. Thanks for listening to Navigating IBD with Stephanie Wynn. If you're ready to take the next step in managing your IBD, grab a copy of Navigating IBD, a 6-week blueprint for better gut health at navigatingibd.com. It's filled with practical strategies to help you understand your symptoms, manage your flares, and advocate for the care you deserve. Until next time, keep trusting your body and moving forward. Peace.